good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for Cherry Bekaert's 2023 Government and Public Sector Virtual Conference. If you missed the morning sessions and you're just now tuning in, my name is Danny Martinez, and I lead Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector Accounting Advisory Group. It's great to see that so many of you all signed up for our final CPE session of the day. We did see that the attendees kind of have stayed consistent throughout. So again, we really appreciate you joining us over these next 2 days. As a reminder, we're offering up to 1 hour of CPE per session. This session will be on focusing on what works, embedding data and evidence into government programs. And we're going to have a guest organization, Results for America, be presenting on this session. I reached out to Haley from Results for America a few months ago, just in seeing the resources and that they have on their website and the programs that they have for state and local governments. We wanted to give you some exposure to the types of programs that they are running, and also give them some exposure to kind of let you all know what they are doing. As a reminder, day 2 of the virtual conference will kick off tomorrow morning at 9:30 Eastern. If you are able to, please attend another 4 hours of jam-packed quality information. If you have not yet registered, please click the link in our chat to update your registration. Some items before we get started. The next slide: to receive some CPE credit, you must answer at least 3 polling questions and attend for the full 50 minutes. CPE certificates will be issued via email within 10 days. If you have not received yours after 10 days, please email cbhlearning@cbh.com. A recorded version and a copy of the PowerPoint for this webinar will be available in about 1 week and will be sent via email and posted on our website. As a reminder, just like the other sessions, if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A window located in your control panel. Keep in mind that is separate from the chat box, so you'll want to be sending your questions to the Q&A window. Just note, a short survey will also be posted at the conclusion of the webinar. We really value your feedback. We want to hear what you thought about today, and then when you attend tomorrow, what you thought about tomorrow, so we can really deliver the most impactful programming for you all. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers, Quinn Stevenson and Haley Kadish with Results for America. Quinn, please take it away.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, do we go to the next slide? And we have a polling question just to kick it off for everyone, since I know this is the after the lunch hour. So I just want to get everyone up and moving with your cursor. How involved are you in the administration of new federal funds, specifically the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act within your organization? We're just trying to get a sense of who may be familiar with these laws already. Okay, and I'll just wait for that poll to close. About 20 more seconds, it sounds like. It sounds like there might be some challenge with the poll. So if you're not able to answer on the poll, feel free to just chat in your answer. That way you can get credit. Okay, let's see the results. So about 50% are not involved, 30% are somewhat involved, and then there's a small selection of about 16% of votes who are very involved. That's actually a pretty good distribution. So there'll be a lot of new information for some folks and a lot of information that may be familiar to some folks, but we can get into more of the resources that could be particularly useful for those who are really involved in the use of ARP bill and IRA for their jurisdiction.
And Quinn, I'll just chime in real quick, just the logistical on the polling questions. Sometimes if you're running it in full screen, the polling question is kind of hiding behind the presentation. So that's one thing to be looking out for, but don't worry, there's quite a few more polls to, in order for you to get your CPE credit throughout this session, but just a helpful tip.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate you jumping in on that logistics piece. Okay, Haley, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just an overview of what we will cover in the next 50 or so minutes. So we will overview all of the bid federal investments and the administration's commitment to data and evidence, and then we'll highlight some resources for you all to understand federal funding, specifically these laws a bit better, and all of the resources that Results for America shares around these funding streams and how we support jurisdictions and how they can embed data, evidence, and evaluation into their jurisdiction using these federal funding streams. So let me talk next a little bit about Results for America. So our mission is to make investing in what works the new normal, so that government decision makers regularly and effectively use evidence and data to increase the impact of the over $2 trillion that governments spend each year to open opportunities and advance economic mobility for their residents. And the way we do that is we have a three-part theory of change. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. We also work at all levels of government, and this theory of change holds for all levels of government, both federal, state, and local. First, we set a North Star by defining what good governance looks like, what positive outcomes for residents looks like, and creating measurable goals for government. The next is we provide implementation support for policymakers to make progress towards those outcomes and towards those North Stars. And then finally, the last piece is we create a movement and we build momentum in part by providing external motivation and celebrating the jurisdictions and the governments that have made significant progress in using data and evidence. And then I wanted to highlight, since it was mentioned earlier, that when RFA works with jurisdictions, we do it completely free to the government partner. We do not accept government funding. So that's all these opportunities that we lift up in the next 50 minutes are completely free. Some are immediately available on our website. Some are more involved programming, but all of it is completely free. Okay, for our next polling question, want to get an understanding of how familiar folks in the room are with evidence-based programming and evaluation. We'll give it maybe 30 more seconds. I'm not sure what the response rate is quite yet. Okay, we're leaving it open for maybe 10 or 15 more seconds, just so everyone can send in their final answer. Okay, so for all these results, there's about 50% or 47% who are not familiar or knowledgeable, some 46% who are somewhat familiar, and about 6% who are very familiar. That's great. So a lot of this information I think will be really new and really helpful. And the resources that we share and that we drop in the chat, I think will be particularly useful as you start to learn about evidence-based programming and how that can be a real asset for your jurisdiction. We can go to the next slide, and I can also just go over really quickly some basic definitions here as we start discussing more. So an evidence-based program is a program that has been rigorously tested and proven effective at improving outcomes. Typically, it is tested through an evaluation. An evaluation can focus on the design, the implementation, or the effects. Another definition I have on here is equity. I wanted to lift that up since equity is a cornerstone of RFA programming, which is essentially the consistent treatment of individuals, especially those who have been historically denied such treatment. So I can leave that slide up for just another second as you read through it, and then we can get into some of the laws and the resources. Okay, so let's go over some of the bid federal investments. I think we have our final after lunch poll right here. So how concerned are you or is your jurisdiction about the approaching fiscal cliff following the expiration of all the new federal funding? Give it another minute or so. And maybe 30 to 60 more seconds. Okay, so we have 30% who are not concerned, about 57 who are somewhat concerned, and 14 who are very concerned. That sounds like it really matches with our earlier poll of who was in the room and who was involved with the reporting for this federal funding. So I think that this will really be helpful for a select few, and it will be really a good intro to all the resources and the reporting out there for everyone else who is a bit less familiar and not as concerned about that fiscal cliff. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the opportunity. So I've mentioned before, but when we're talking about this federal funding, we're referring to three specific laws, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Today, we will focus primarily on the American Rescue Plan and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And generally at Results for America, when we think of all these laws, we think of them together as a $4 trillion opportunity, which is an immense amount of funding. And when you think about it, this is truly a once in a lifetime generation opportunity for government. Just a decade ago or a few years ago during the Great Recession, many of these same governments were starved for revenue. They had to lay off or furlough staff and make a lot of painful cuts to services. Today, the exact opposite is true. Cities, counties, and states have significant dollars to invest, and they have a real opportunity to make transformational investments in infrastructure, in climate resilience, in developing a competitive workforce, advancing racial equity, and accelerating economic mobility for their residents. But within that opportunity for all that change, it's really important that government is ensuring these dollars are well spent, that residents and the community have a voice in how those dollars are invested, and that government is turning to the best solutions and the most effective investments for using these federal dollars. And so that's kind of the opportunity at play. But also with that opportunity comes tremendous challenges. We have been hearing that the sheer number of opportunity is really overwhelming, especially for small and mid-sized communities. A lot of local governments are trying to figure out which competitive grants they're even eligible for, which they should apply for. Some are waiting to see if they will get funding from their states. And a lot of them are just generally worried about the capacity. Do they have federal grant writers? Do they have project managers to secure this funding or to navigate the complex federal grants, right? So at RFA, we are focused on helping governments use data and evidence to maximize the impact of these investments and also access the funding where possible so that they can continue to choose solutions that have been proven effective to support and advance economic mobility for their residents. And let's go to the next slide, and I can talk more about how data and evidence and these bills connect. So within both the American Rescue Plan and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the administration has released guidance both from Treasury and the Office of Management and Budget to lift up these 5 key practices. The first is to build data and evidence capacity so that they're using their funds to build their systems, their knowledge base, their ability to use data critically. And the second, and very clearly connected to that, is using data and evidence. So that's jurisdictions spending these federal resources on evidence-based solutions that have been supported by either strong, moderate, or even preliminary evidence, since there is connections to this being a good evidence-based solution for them to implement with these funds. The third is investing in evaluation. We mentioned this is how evidence-based programs are tested and vetted that requires evaluation. So this is really unique that these funds can be used to evaluate programs, and we definitely want to encourage jurisdictions to use these funds to do that. And then the fourth and fifth are echo what I mentioned before, which is that in the use of these funds, jurisdictions should be centering their community and engaging with their community and the voice of their residents. And then finally, they should be looking to ensure equitable outcomes, particularly for communities and populations in their community that have not had access to these opportunities before. So next, I want to go really quickly into the American Rescue Plan, and then I'll pass to Haley to talk more about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So when we are speaking of the American Rescue Plan, we're specifically looking at the state and local fiscal recovery fund, which is $350 billion going directly to state, local, and tribal governments. These are one-time funds that have already been directly sent to governments in 2021, and governments have a lot of flexibility in how they choose to spend these dollars. All these dollars need to be obligated by end of 2024 and spent down by 2026. So we're in a real critical moment in summer of 2023, where there's approximately 18 months left for jurisdictions to decide how they are planning to use these funds and what evidence-based solutions are they choosing to fund, what evaluations are they anticipating funding to make the best use of these dollars that they were given. And I want to connect how American Rescue Plan dollars have been used in some governments. So let me bring up 2 examples. The first is in Dallas. So in Dallas, they funded Family Connects for up to $2 million. Family Connects program available for families with newborns, and home visiting is an evidence-based program that has been proven to lead to higher infant and maternal health outcomes. It is also featured in our economic ability catalog, which we will talk about a bit more later on in the presentation. The second opportunity I want to lift up is Colorado. So Colorado invested both in early childhood mental health consultation, but they also committed to evaluating this program at its conclusion. And so it's really important. Yes, I will speak a little louder. Thank you for the comment, Danny. I'm not sure if you all can tell, but I actually lost power earlier today, so I'm in a public space and trying to be a bit quiet, but yes. In Colorado, the state invested in early childhood mental health consultation. It's not just important that they are investing in a project to treat mental health, but they also have committed to evaluating this project at its conclusion. What's really important about that is because in anticipation of American Rescue Plan dollars being when they have all been spent down, the results of this evaluation will be really helpful, not just for other governments, other state and local governments, to see if this was a successful model for early childhood mental health, but it will also be really helpful for Colorado as it decides what to continue funding based on the conclusion of those funds and what to potentially scale. Right, so that's why we really highlight evaluation, and it's so great that evaluation is an eligible use of funds in the American Rescue Plan. With that, I'm going to pass it to Haley to talk a bit more about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law.
Okay, thank you, Quinn. Can folks hear me okay? All right, good. Thank you, Quinn, for reviewing the bipartisan infrastructure law, or for reviewing the American Rescue Plan. The bipartisan infrastructure law is also another really historic investment, and this investment focuses on critical infrastructure. It includes things like that we typically talk about and think about when we're talking about infrastructure, think roads and bridges and railways. But it also has some kind of new and different ways of thinking about infrastructure. So thinking about clean water, clean energy, broadband, electric vehicle infrastructure. So it's a very broad investment in infrastructure. And not only does it include the $1.2 trillion that Quinn mentioned earlier, but it's also notable for its integrated focus on workforce equity and climate. Those are really baked into the infrastructure law. The law aims to tackle climate change, cultivate a diverse workforce for projects, and also invest in left behind communities. So that's pretty unique about this legislation. 76%, so the majority of the funding that is available through bill is going to go through federal agencies or through formula funds that go typically to states. But there is a large portion, so the remaining 24% is going to be authorized through competitive grants. And the reason that's important is that, these communities cannot sit and wait for the funds to come to them. A lot of this funding, you have to actually come up with a project idea and propose it through a grant application to various federal agencies. And what's notable about this is that there are more than 400 competitive grant opportunities through the infrastructure law. So this is a huge opportunity that we want to make sure cities and counties and governments don't miss out on, particularly because this funding is meant to go towards disadvantaged and underserved communities, which may have a more difficult time with obtaining some of this funding and accessing some of this funding. One of the things that I want to highlight about this competitive funding is that it comes out in cycles. So a lot of the grants that are released, we talk about notice of funding opportunities. So when the federal agency says we're going to give out grant funding, they release a notice of funding opportunity, and that's a request for proposals basically and for applications. A lot of the grants are released year to year over and over. And so that's important because there's an opportunity to learn from communities that have been successful in the process before. It's also an opportunity to give your organization time to really think through and develop a really great project that can then be included in your application. So as an example, we are seeing Reconnecting Communities is a big bipartisan infrastructure law grant. The 2022 applications, those have been now awarded. So we see awardees for that, but there's also a 2023 application now open going forward. And so you'll see this cadence, and this funding goes through 2026. So you do have time. There's still years left to really get your organization ready to compete for some of this really interesting funding. Another thing I want to stress here is that, so similar to Treasury's guidance around eligible use of ARP, the White House Office of Management and Budget released guidance to guide these federal agencies and set the priorities for what they want to see in their notice of funding opportunities. This is important because that's going to be critical in developing a really competitive application. So you get to see from the OMB guidance what the federal agencies should be prioritizing and looking at when they're evaluating these grant applications. And so that really gives you kind of like the inside look at what the organizations are hoping to see, and that can really help your organization put together a competitive grant application. While we see all of those same key practices in the bipartisan infrastructure law, what's interesting about this is that there really isn't a great body of evidence around infrastructure projects. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Infrastructure projects can last decades. The data may not have been collected early on to tell about the impact and linking that activity to a specific outcome. There's also a lot of other things going on in communities along with infrastructure projects over their long time frame. But it's a unique challenge that the administration needs to focus on with the infrastructure law. So part of the way that they've baked in and supported those key practices in the infrastructure law is to include in the OMB guidance funding and steps and priorities that help set up that body of evidence going forward. So ultimately, the hope is that after the bipartisan infrastructure law, all of this funding has been spent, that we will actually have a really great body of evidence when it comes to infrastructure, and we'll know what works, which we at RFA are very committed to. So in particular, the OMB guidance focuses on building capacity. So there's a lot of room for investment there. Also directing programs to collect and use data to build that evidence on program effectiveness. So really investing up front and gathering the data so that we can know at the end of the project if it was effective, if the program was effective. And it also focuses on making evidence-based decisions. And so that's a place where we'll talk again about the economic mobility catalog in a little bit. And so that can be helpful for organizations as they try to go for some of this funding. If you're able to demonstrate that you are making decisions based on evidence and that your project incorporates evidence into its proposal, that can be really effective. The guidance also focuses on conducting meaningful engagement. So Quinn talked about that. That's a big focus in the infrastructure law, especially in the project ideation phase, and really coming up with community priorities and making sure that a lot of voices are involved in the development of proposals for this funding. So given the infrastructure law's focus on underserved communities, I think it's worth discussing another federal initiative. It's not bill specific. It actually spans lots of different federal funding opportunities, but I do think it's very relevant to this conversation. So the Justice 40 initiative, you may have heard of this. It's been around for a couple of years now, but they're really starting to put some meat on the bones of this initiative. So it's part of the federal government's commitment to ensure that at least 40% of the benefits from its investments in climate and clean energy go to disinvested communities. So that's low income areas, communities of color, tribal communities. So when Justice 40 was first introduced, what qualified as a disinvested community was not defined clearly. And so the federal government has spent some time over the past years to really flesh that out. So recently, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool was released, and we'll put a link in the chat for this tool. This can be really helpful as your community is considering going for these funding opportunities and building your application and telling the story of your project. It actually goes down to the census tract level, and it says this census tract is disadvantaged or not. And so that's going to be really helpful, and it's just also a really interesting tool to look at for your own community. I've spent a lot of time poking around to see how my city scales up on this. So now that we've talked about how data and evidence are embedded into the federal stimulus funds, we're going to start sharing some resources that can help your organization and your community navigate all of this federal funding, because it's such a huge opportunity. But before we do that, we want to start with another polling question. So has your organization added any additional positions to support the management of these new federal funds? Definitely heard of some interesting new job titles in recent years related to infrastructure, but I'm curious if there's additional capacity and support in your organizations to manage these funds. Right. All right, so 27% unsure, 45% no new positions. That sort of tracks with how my organization, when I worked for a city, was tracking. And then 28% are saying that there's new positions. So that's really helpful information. Thank you all. I remember a grant administrator I knew talked about there's no free money. She was always talking about that. So no such thing as free money. All right, so let's get into some of the resources that we have available. And as we're going through these, we'll do some demonstrations, and then we're also going to share links in the chat for you to be able to interact with these resources, because all of these are available to communities. Some of them might be more intensive experiences, so you do have to apply. It's like not an in-person, but it's like a scheduled training type thing. But a lot of them are just available online immediately. So we'll encourage you to visit those sites. Just to start out, I want to introduce you to the Local Infrastructure Hub. So this is a partnership between several organizations, National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, Results for America, and we are focused on trying to help communities that otherwise might not be able to secure some of this the competitive bipartisan infrastructure law funding. We want to help them come up with, navigate the federal grants first to figure out if they should apply or what should they apply for, what matches with their community priorities, and then to help them prepare strong applications. So one pillar, the Navigating Federal Grant pillar of our programming, is mostly webinars, and then we call them public goods, but resources, toolkits, things that we can post on a website and you can take at your own pace. And we have typically about 2 webinars a month, and they're timed based on NOFO releases. So as we, for example, we learn about Reconnecting Communities award winners, we'll feature them in a webinar. You get to hear their story and learn from them. And we also pair that conversation with federal speakers who share insights into what they're hoping to see in applications, what they think is going really well, what they wish were different about funding, like the applications that they're receiving. So a lot of really nuanced information comes from those speakers in those webinars. And so we'll share a link to the Infrastructure Hub and you can register for those webinars. Currently, they're only available to cities. And so when you go to register, you have to be a city to register, but all of the webinar information is available and posted. All the recordings are posted on the website. So you can watch webinars after the fact anytime, and you can go back to see some of our more popular ones related to the EV charging, NOFO, and funding sources that were out. So you can always go back and peruse those past resources. The other piece of the Local Infrastructure Hub that's important is a set of boot camps. So they're much more intense technical assistance. It's over the course of a few weeks, and they have experts that help you work on your grant application. Now, the limitation for this resource is that it's only available to communities that are 150,000 population or less. And so we have the boot camp registration data is on that Infrastructure Hub website that we're sharing with you. So you can stay up to date on that. You're also welcome to reach out to us and we can help you kind of figure out where you fit in the Local Infrastructure Hub resourcing. I want to highlight a couple resources that are readily available. So we have this tool on the Infrastructure Hub website called a grant search. So you'll see in the left-hand corner, you can go in and you can look for a specific agency. If you just want to type keywords like electric vehicle charging or something like that, you can look in there. And it will give you all of the information, key takeaways from the NOFO. I know NOFOs can be kind of a lot to digest. Some of them are like 100 pages. So this is a great way to get the key information about who's eligible, how much funding are we talking about, that type of thing through this grant search tool. So I definitely want to recommend using that and looking through that. We also have recently started featuring winning applications. So what we hear from cities and from counties is that they want examples, right? They don't want to start from scratch. They want to see what other communities have done. How did they tell the story? How do they incorporate data? And so we feature on our website now winning applications. As the infrastructure law grants are announced, we're going to keep adding to this. So right now, we have Safe Streets and Roads for All, Reconnecting Communities, and I believe RAISE grants have been announced. And so we have copies of actual applications that you can peruse to kind of get an idea and a feel for what a winning application looks like. We also, on the right-hand side, you'll see this is an example of kind of like a little one-pager case study that we've done of a project. So this is looking at the Reconnecting Communities grant program. And this one features the Tucson, Arizona's project. So we do these often in association with our webinars. So we'll feature a community in our webinar. We'll have one-pagers released. And so these are also available on our website. And this can be a nice way to just kind of help with ideation and think through like learning from what other communities have done and taking those into consideration. The other thing that we are working on within the hub is we are trying to contribute to this body of infrastructure evidence that we're trying to build. So we are hoping in the coming months to be releasing basically strategies and projects that are evidence informed so that you can actually see a rigorous study was conducted related to this project and it has demonstrated that it accomplished this outcome. And so that will be another great source of project ideation and inspiration for your community. So look for that on the website when it comes out. So those are the main infrastructure hub resources. I want to also share, while we don't have a ton of evidence around infrastructure yet, Results for America does have what we call an economic mobility catalog, and it's a catalog of evidence. It's a catalog of strategies and models that are evidence-based, and they're designed specifically for leaders to facilitate identifying and implementing these evidence-based strategies. So it's a catalog of evidence-informed practices that you can go and learn about. Each one is detailed, different elements of the strategy. And then it also has examples of communities and how they've made this work, how they've implemented the strategy, what the impact has been in their community. So this is, I think, a really great resource, and it's always being added to. Currently, we have over 200 evidence-based strategies in there, and I think we have more than 50 case studies now. So this is like a really great resource. If your community is struggling or has a certain priority, you can go find evidence-informed practices based on the strategy, which I think can be really great resource for communities. And they're very implementation focused, which is great. Another awesome resource that we are going to share is the ARP dashboard. So Quinn.
Haley, before we jump to the ARP dashboard,
Yeah.
there are two questions in the Q&A section regarding the hub and Bill that I wanted to lift up for you.
Great.
So the first question is from Mark. Are state agencies eligible to apply for competitive IIJA grants?
That's a great question. So state agencies are, but it also depends on the notice of funding opportunity. So when you go into that grant search, or if you're looking on grants.gov, they'll explicitly say if states are eligible or if it's just local governments, but a lot of them that we're seeing, all government organizations are eligible for those funds.
Great. And then the second question is from Susan, and it's about the hub. If an area is incorporated as a town, would they be eligible to participate in the hub offerings?
So I think if you are a town, I think that they will let you through. In the end, I think the limitation has been just based on our funding source. So it's kind of a silly distinction, but I think if you have a .gov or a .org that is a city or county name, they'll probably let you through. The only reason I told you that it's available online after the fact is that just in case you run into any issues with that, the programming is really geared towards cities, and we feature a lot of mayors and city speakers. But so I would encourage you to register. And if you run into any issues, you can also just reach out to me and I can help you get into the webinar, because I think it is a really great resource. And I do want to clarify that being eligible to be part of the webinars is definitely different from being eligible to be part of the funding. So while our resources on the hub are aimed at cities, the bipartisan infrastructure law is focused on city, state, county, town, all of that, and often like regional partnerships and that type of thing as well. So thanks for those questions, guys.
So going back to the American Rescue Plan really quickly, and just some of the resources that connect to the American Rescue Plan more directly, as Haley has now talked about the hub and Bill. for the American Rescue Plan, I alluded to it, but I should be a bit more clear that all jurisdictions received their funding in tranche funding in 2021. So unlike the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which has competitive grants, all jurisdictions have already received their American Rescue Plan stimulus fund, or their state and local fiscal recovery fund directly. And they just need to allocate it and spend it down by 2026. And when the American Rescue Plan was passed and announced, RFA was really interested in how jurisdictions were going to implement these dollars and how they were going to use the guidance from the Treasury. So we created the American Rescue Plan Data and Evidence Dashboard. Here is a screenshot of it. And what's really great about the dashboard is that it includes 200 jurisdictions, the recovery report that they each submit to Treasury. And from that recovery report that each jurisdiction submits, we were able to build a snapshot of all the funding priorities of each of these 200 jurisdictions, and also evaluate how well each state and local government has been implementing these 5 key practices we mentioned before. And let me just do a quick time check. I think we have enough time that I can actually screen share it and share it in a minute. But one of the best things about this dashboard that I will show you is that the way jurisdictions have been using it is they are able to go into the dashboard, compare their jurisdiction to another jurisdiction of a similar size, or potentially, if you're a city, you're able to compare to your county or your state and see where your spending priorities align. And also, we are really proud to have included 110 notable projects that Results for America reviewed and vetted to be something we deem a notable project in either an evidence-based program that jurisdictions used, an effort to evaluate a project, or a project to build, enhance their data and evidence capacity. And we lift up 110 projects. We actually reviewed over 8,000 projects, and we narrowed in on these 110 that we really wanted to lift up for other jurisdictions to see and be able to potentially replicate in their own jurisdictions. So I think I have time. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I can walk you through the dashboard. And I believe the link was already shared previously. Yes. Okay, is it screen sharing? I believe so. Okay, so it is directly on our website. It's right here. And on the very first page, you are able to see all these investment trends. As I mentioned, this is a snapshot of 200 jurisdictions, and we used their 2022 annual performance report. This is being updated live. So we're actually really looking forward to updating this dashboard with everyone's reporting, both their quarterly reporting and also their 2023 performance report, which, if you're one of the folks that is really involved in your jurisdiction's use of that funds, you would have just submitted that report last Monday. Results for America is really looking forward to reviewing it. But you're able to see how jurisdictions are spending based on the eligible expenditure categories. On the expenditure categories, you also, hold on, my internet may be a bit funky, are able to go to investment areas. And we identified 13 topic areas that you are able to see what the distribution is of a community, of what they are choosing to invest in. This also works if you want to search an individual community. And each of these visualizations I'm showing you has the ability for you to filter by the city, county, state level, and also if you wish to go and select your individual jurisdiction down here. The most exciting pieces, though, that I want to share about is the 3rd and 4th tab. So this 3rd tab is the recovery plan score. And this is where I mentioned we were really interested in evaluating how jurisdictions were incorporating the 5 key practices. And we have been able to see, based on here in this grid and also in the distribution chart, of what jurisdictions were really doing with these 5 key practices. And what they were really successful in was ensuring community engagement and focusing on equitable outcomes. But there is definitely room for improvement in incorporating evidence-based programming, funding impact evaluations, and also efforts to improve their own data and evidence capacity. And we will actually talk a little bit more about one resource specific to impact evaluation in just a few minutes. And then the final tab, which I just overviewed previously, is all about those notable projects. You'll see we have 110 here based on city, county, and state. And this is actually filterable. So you can go look if your city, county, or state, what is your topic area they're interested in? And are you looking to fund an evidence-based project, an impact evaluation, or just a project to improve your own data and evidence capacity? And this will give you an example, a project description, a jurisdiction that is doing this well with ARP funding, and also it connects directly to the strategy they are using from the economic ability catalog. So if you're able to see a strategy here and you're interested in how a jurisdiction did it and you want a case study on it, or you want to see more, you can both look at that jurisdiction's performance report, and you also can go back to the economic ability catalog that Haley mentioned and just read more about that strategy generally. Okay, let me switch to the final slide in our presentation really quickly. Okay, is this new slide visible? Okay, great. So really quickly, I want to talk about LEVER, which is leveraging evaluation evidence for an equitable recovery. So connecting back to that dashboard I just showed you, in our review of all of the 200 jurisdictions recovery reports, we noticed that there were a lot of pilot programs being started by jurisdictions, but not necessarily a lot of evaluation that was being funded. And we thought that was a great opportunity to support jurisdictions and building their own data and capacity, data and evidence capacity to prepare for an evaluation, and also one day be able to launch an evaluation of a program that they are funding. So we partnered with JPAL North America, which is the Poverty Action Lab at MIT, and created LEVER. And what LEVER will do is it is offering workshops and training specific to state and local governments to train you on your capacity for preparing an evaluation, and also an incubator for you to potentially apply for funding to set up an evaluation of a program if you are ready to launch an evaluation. There are also convenings with researchers and also office hours for folks to at both RFA and JPAL North America to connect with you and talk through how you're thinking about your data collection and the potential to evaluate some of your programs. And actually the training sprints, the training sprint that Results America is offering, applications just closed this past Friday, and we connected with a team and we're able to offer an extension for this application. There is a link in the chat if you want to go learn more about that 10-week training sprint regarding building in evidence, evaluation, and equity into your jurisdiction's culture. You can submit an application by end of this week. Feel free to send me an email and I can keep that deadline open for you. And I'm also happy to answer questions, but this is our final resource that I wanted to lift up and how it connects to both the American Rescue Plan and also all of the funding opportunities that we have covered today. And with that, I think that's our final slide.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Haley or Quinn, can you just jump in real quick? And I had a few questions about how could they get involved, and you mentioned that the resources are free. So maybe if you could share a little bit more about how local governments can get involved with you all, and partner with you, whether it be the boot camps or the applications or those types of things.
Well, if you go to the Local Infrastructure Hub website there and you scroll down just a little bit on the homepage, there is a place where you can sign up. And so that gives us your contact information. And we do send, we call it the LH Insider. So each month, kind of a consolidated, condensed version of NOFO's information, like key dates that are coming up, things you need to be aware of, resources that we think might be critical to communities. We share those once a month. And that also then kind of puts you on our radar. But the other thing you can do is go into the calendar of events and you can register for a webinar. And you can register for whatever webinars you're interested in too. It's not like you have to be spammed by all of them. So whatever looks like it aligns with your community's priorities, I would recommend you do that. I'm also happy we've shared our emails in the slide deck. And so Quinn and I, of course, are always welcome. Like, you're always welcome to email either of us. We'd be happy to work with you to figure out what resources that Results for America offers might fit your community's needs. Quinn, anything else to add to that?
Sure, yes. So if you're particularly interested in just in Lever, which I'm really happy to plug because I'm actually going to review applications to the training sprint later this afternoon, you can go to the Lever website, which I believe was dropped in the chat just a few moments ago, and there is an intake form where you can share your interest. You can show if you're interested just in both the training sprint, the incubator, just more information generally. We also previously had workshops that were, short 2-week opportunities, and then generally, if I could find a link, RFA offers a lot of other programming specific to state and local leaders. Let me just drop this link. This is specific to all of the opportunities that RFA offers for local policymakers, and I will pull the state one as well. We have a lot of offerings to support jurisdictions and how they embed data and evidence into their jurisdiction. Haley and I focus specifically on the opportunities available from all those recovery funds, since that is the bread and butter of our work, but there are also numerous opportunities with our colleagues and the other programs they run.
And so I guess the other question is, so if this is free, like really truly free to governments, how are you all funded, and how do you all support your operations?
That's a great question. So Results for America is 100% philanthropically funded.
Great.
So,
I wanted to make that clear, that it's not like free on the website and then all of a sudden they're getting it. But wait, there's more with all of this, all these other things. So I just want to make sure I pointed it out. So thank you very, very much. We have a couple polling questions that we are going to issue. Looks like we got another question. How large of an organization are you?
not quite sure how to answer that. We work with the entire US state, so cities, states, and the federal government. And then one of our programs actually expanded to North and South America, so including Canada, Mexico, and Latin America earlier this year. Our organization staff-wise is between 50 to 100 folks. But we're a small but mighty team.
Great. And so the bonus poll question is, were you aware of Results for America before this training today? Let's give it a minute, just to get another way to allow our attendees to get their CPE credits. All right, so it looks like we have 83% no, 11% yes, and 6% unsure. So kind of speaks to the reason that we brought you all on. I've been on your website for quite a few important reasons. Initially, it was, how are people spending the money? That ARPA dashboard that you just barely scratched the surface on, amazing for that, and really digging into that. And then you got into the phase where people wanted evidence-based examples, right? And there's a lot of things in the fiscal recovery funds that it asks you to give you the evidence-based examples. And so you all on your website have some proof from some state and local governments where they've done it with the evidence-based and how they explain that. And then lastly, really awesome, those winning applications, right? Show me how you were awarded from these competitive awards. So I really think that beyond everything else that you've shared today, those three things are going to be very helpful for our attendees. Greatly appreciate you all joining and jumping on today. We will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint slide. You have all of the links here on in the chat. And please reach out to Quinn and Haley if you have additional questions.